In this presentation, we will enter cash outflows, which will include checks and other outflows from the bank statement into QuickBooks. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are in our bank statement. We have our bank statement and we've entered the deposits so far. The beginning balance has been entered because we've already entered that in the prior presentations and reconciled for it. We are now looking at these checks items, the 14,209 broken out in the right side, which will include the checks and other withdrawals. We're going to include mainly the checks here. Remember that whether it be checks or some type of electronic transfer, it doesn't really matter. We'll have similar data. If we have electronic transfers, we won't have the check numbers, but we'll still have date and hopefully vendors. If we have a banking system that they do write a lot of checks and the bank does not give us on the bank statement the vendors who we wrote the check to, then we may need to cancel checks from the bank to show us the actual kind of written checks to show us, or a copy of them, who the vendors are, so that we can enter those into our system. So remember that electronic payments may be easier, meaning not electronic downloads into our QuickBooks system, but electronic payments could be easier for us to then take those payments and enter them from the bank statement, because we'll have the detail for them into QuickBooks in some type of fashion, in this type of fashion. So let's go through this here. We're going to just go through these line by line. Remember that we will have more of different problems with the deposit, with the expenses, and the vendors, the payments, the outflows, because we're going to have a lot of different people here. And unlike the deposits, we don't really care who the customers are in this system. We're not tracking receivables. We don't care who the customer is. We just need to know that it's income, so that we do record the income for the deposits. Over here, we do care because we can't record everything just as an expense. That doesn't work. People won't like that. We need to categorize at least a little bit on what type of expense it is. And that's the problem, that we're going to have to convert the vendor who we're paying to what they do, and then decide what expense we should categorize based on what it is that these vendors do. So this would be a lot easier, or should be, since we've already done it for the first month. Second month, a lot of these vendors should be repetitive. Accounting is typically pretty repetitive over time. And so it should be a lot easier, and the system will actually help us to enter some of this information because it'll remember some of the last transactions. So that's what we'll do here. We're going to go back to QuickBooks. We're in the open windows here, the home page. To see the open windows, you go to the view drop down and select open windows list. We're going to go back to the check register. So to do that, we're going to go to the banking up top. We're going to use register. And then when the check register, that's the one we want. We should be fairly familiar with it if you've been following along with us now. So now we're going to enter this data. So if we go back to our bank statement, we're just going to go straight down this. Any problems we find, we're going to write that down in our open items, which we have open now because we probably will have a few that we're going to have to ask questions about. But we're just going to ask a question. We're going to push forward with those. So here we go. On 2.2, we have Office Depot. So let's start entering that and see if QuickBooks remembers anything that we had last time. So 020219, February 2nd, 2019. That's the easiest way to enter it. I hit tab and then put 020219. We're going to say that this is going to be a check, and the check is going to be 1006. So that's the check it should be on. I'm not sure why it shows that last check, a little worrisome, but it should be 1006. Okay, and note that the checks aren't always going to be in order here, because these are checks as they've cleared, not as we wrote them. So it's not unusual that it would be out of order as the checks appear. And so just be aware of that. If we were writing the checks, they would be in order. So we're gonna say this is to Office Depot, and as I start putting that in there, I see Office Depot. So we want to make sure as the second month that we start entering data that we're not duplicating vendors. The vendor should be there, and it should be really easy because, like we say, if we just start typing in Office Depot, it should be implemented there and we should be able to find it. Now, if we misspell something or we have some kind of issue, if I only had one F and I started doing this, Office Depot, then I'm going to end up with multiple vendors and it's going to be really ugly. So just be careful of that. But Other than that, we should be able to type in and it'll then autofill and we say, there's Office Depot, it looks good, that's the one we want. Tab, and that's going to be 520. Now, we want to be careful to go through this because it is possible that the different vendors may have had some changes. In this case, I see uncategorized expense. Why? Because if I look back to my notes, we won't do it, but if I look back to the notes in the prior presentation, or if we can see that the Office Depot that we had was for a large dollar. I'm scrolling up to see if we can find the Office Depot here. It was a large dollar amount last time we went to Office Depot. And note, you can see that if you're questioning this, and if I couldn't find it, we can also go to the vendors here and go to the vendor center. Vendors drop down, vendor center. These are people we pay, like Office Depot. And then if we go down Office Depot, notice it's storing these vendors for us as we add them into the check register. And here's Office Depot. Now nothing's in here because I'm working this problem in the future. So it's actually 2018. So I need to see 2019. So to do that, I'm going to run a report, which you can do right down here, run reports. And I'm just going to say view report and change the dates from 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. And so then I see this check here. And if I see it, then I say, oh, that's for 9,000. And that's kind of the reason. If I double check on that, you could say, oh, it's for 9,000. That's why it's an undeposited. My current check's only for 520, which seems more reasonable as like office supplies or something. So Office Depot being an office supply store, I would think would just be going into office supplies. We didn't do that last time. We put it into undeposited or uncategorized. Why? Because it was a large dollar amount. And if we had written a memo, which we probably should have, it would even be more clear on that. So now we'll close this out. We'll close this out. I'm going to close the vendor center. Now we're back here. So that's just the reason that we got to be a little bit careful and say it may not be the same. In our case now, I think it's appropriate because it's 520 to put it to some kind of office supplies or office expense or something like that. If we go back up here and check our accounts, we can see that there's an office supplies account. Since it being Office Depot, that seems reasonable. So I'm going to select office supplies and say okay. So that'll be the first one. If we go back here, I'm going to cross that off. We're going to say we found that one on the bank statement. Next one says Wells Fargo Bank on 944. So that's a little bit unusual to have the check going to Wells Fargo. So we might not, we might say, I don't know what that is. We're going to have to ask about that. But I'm still going to put it into the system. I'm not going to let that stop us. We're just going to keep moving forward here. So we'll go back to the system. And I'm going to say, 225. Well, I know it's got to decrease the checking account. There's the check number. That's right. It's going to Wells Fargo. So there's Wells Fargo. It's already set up as an other. So I'm just going to keep that. We don't need a new, so the vendor is the same. And so we're going to say it's for 944. And it's a payment. It doesn't give us anything down here, even though it was already in there. Why? Because last time we entered it as a deposit from Wells Fargo, and this time we're entering something from Wells Fargo as a decrease, a payment. So that's why it's not trying to give us some type of what we did last time type. So if we went and looked at the vendor center, we wouldn't have a vendor center because we set it up as other, and that's because it was a deposit. So in any case, we're gonna say, where should we put it? I don't know. So we're gonna put it into uncategorized income, uncategorized expense, I should say, uncategorized expense. Okay, and we'll say enter. And then it's asking if I want checks. If you don't want this to pop up anymore, say do not display this message and say okay. And then we're going to go back to our notes over here and note this out. So I'm going to ask here, if there's a check number 1007 on 25 that you wrote to Wells Fargo Bank. What is this? And if I was to guess, if you're writing a check to the bank or something that sounds like a banking institution, that it may be a loan that you took out and you're paying a loan back. That's our guess on it. That would be a reasonable guess. So it's nice for us to kind of give a reasonable guess. We don't want to just run on that guess if we're not really sure. We want to ask about it, give our reasonable guess so it looks like we're doing our due diligence, but just double checking on some of those items, because that could have a significant impact on the financials to put that as an expense or as a loan. Once we get the answer, we'll discuss how we will deal with that. Now, I'm going to go back here and just put it into where we put it, uncategorized expense. So back to our statements, we're going to say we found a home for that one. Right click and highlight. Post office, we saw that last month, so that shouldn't be a problem. We're going to go back here on the 8th, and we're going to say that this is the post office. That's the correct check number. And we could find the post office selecting this drop down, or just type in post office. Remember that if they type something separate like US Post Office or something like that, it'll differ, but usually the name will be the same, especially if it's an electronic kind of item in there. Then the names are typically very similar, so it's useful to put in a name that you see directly from the bank statement, because those are the ones that will be repetitive. So we're going to keep this, and it doesn't give us the dollar amount because that'll mainly change. We could change the settings for it to give us the dollar amount of the prior transaction. So but in this case, we're going to keep typing it in there, and it does give us the prior account we went to. Just automatically remembers that. That's great. That's nice. I like that. And postage to office, we have to check it because remember it was wrong last time, but this one looks appropriate. So I think that one's the correct one. So we're going to say okay. And it says there's a duplicate check number. And notice, so it's saying that we already used this 1008, and we did. So that one is, they gave us a good note. I'm going to change it to 1009, which is the appropriate check number. Now, if you mess up on the check numbers, really not going to hurt anything in the long run. But if you go back in and you need to double check something to see if a check cleared or something, then you're going to have that one little thing will be off, and it'll throw you off a little bit when you try to verify the information. So we want it as accurate as possible here. So we're going to say okay. Next transaction we're going to say was Ted's Steakhouse. So again, that's another one of those ones where it's like, all right, that sounds like a restaurant. I could be pretty clear on that. I could double check that. That's not a problem. Problem is, I'm not sure if it's personal or business, and so we want to get some feel for the client customer and say, these how aggressive are you on because they're probably thinking, do I want to write it off for taxes or whatnot? And so, and again, that's not our business. That's between them and their advisor for tax preparation. If they say it's a tax write-off, or if it's a business expense, then we'll do the business expense, noting that our job is not tax preparation at this point. Our job is just data input. We would recommend, we hope it's good, and you can check it with your tax professional to see whether or not it's something that you should deduct on a tax return or something like that. So we're going to just ask about it here. We're not going to get into any, what should you do with it. We're just saying, hey, we want to know if this is business or personal, and note that we're always on your side here. So we'll put it on either place, and if you have any questions about it, ask the professional for tax advice. So we're going to go into here and write a note on that. So we're just going to say Ted's Steakhouse, is it business or professional? And and we'll discuss more about what we do, whether we get one of those choices. If it's business, then we'll write it to like meals and entertainment or something like that. If it's personal, then we're going to have to write it off to draws. And so we'll see what happens. And we'll have some clients that mix up their business and personal, and it's nothing, no big, they just aren't as good at breaking those two things out, and therefore we'll have to get used to that, just pull that out. It's not too difficult once we note those things to then reallocate them to draws. We just need to know how that feels, and once we get a feel for whether or not these types of lunches and whatnot are business lunches or not that are being put on like the business checking account, then we can make some assumptions going forward. But until we get there, we got to go and say, okay, we got to ask these questions about these restaurants and whatnot to make sure that we're allocating them properly. So we don't know yet, so we're just going to go into our books and say, okay, we wrote our note there, and this is as of 2/11. So we're going to say that we have the check number, which is Ted's Steakhouse is 1012. And I don't think we have Ted's Steakhouse in here yet. That's a new place. We should visit it ourselves. So we're going to say Ted's Steakhouse. Is that how you steak? That's what they put on there. So instead, and we're going to say quick add and vendor. Now notice we have to put it in the system. Whether they tell us it's business or personal doesn't matter. We're still going to put it in the system. It just means that we're going to have to do something different with it in the account. So we're going to say it's going to be $970. We can't not put it in there because it left the business checking account, and we have to do that to reconcile. So the question is it meals and entertainment, or is it personal, which means it's going to go to draws or some type of equity account. So we're going to go ahead and say here, we don't know, so I'm going to put it to uncategorized expense. And we could put a memo. Memos would be good. I'm not going to do memos here, but any memo you put to give you more information would be a good idea. I do recommend doing them, although I'm not doing them here as much as probably would be recommended. So then we're going to go to Epiphone. We've seen them before. So we'll go back here. Next one's for Epiphone on, what was it, the 12th? 12th. To 1014. And so we could find the vendor by selecting the drop-down or typing in Epiphone and tab. And the Epiphone was for 1600 tab. So again, it went to uncategorized. Why? We don't know who that is. We looked it up last time. It looks like guitars. Or it looks like they sell guitar. They have something to do with music stuff. So maybe it's a vendor that they buy inventory from. And again, in this system, I would suggest reducing inventory clients. But we're gonna deal with a little bit of inventory here just to get an idea of how we might use a system like this if we had some type of inventory, what we can do about that. And so we're gonna say okay. So we're putting in the uncategorized right now. We're gonna go back over here and Epiphone, found that, and we'll highlight that. Next one is gonna be the Visa. Now I'm gonna mess up the amount here again, just to try to mess up the amount. So this is an actual intentional. And stated intentional as opposed to intentional but not stated as I did last month. And so we'll put it into the Visa here. So Visa, so we'll go back over here, and this is going to be as of the 12th as well, 10/16. And have we paid Visa? Let's see if we've got Visa here. So I type in Visa. We do, so we've paid Visa before. And so I'm going to miskey it by 1,000 instead of 1,030. We should be able to find that when we reconcile. So I'm going to say that's okay. We're going to look for that. Why do we have it in uncategorized? Because we don't know the Visa payment. We don't know whether it be for inventory or not. So we're going to ask about that. So I'm going to keep that and say okay. Now note we haven't been putting these in the notes. We probably should put something in the note. We may not need as much detail. So we have an Epiphone, and Visa. So we may just put in our notes, hey, we've got Epiphone and Visa. We asked about these vendors in January, just to remind ourselves, hey, we've already asked about that. Notice that these notes here are not what we're going to actually email to the client, of course. We're going to put it in a more straightforward way. We're just we're jotting down our notes here as we go, and then we're going to give a better looking email to the customer, asking them about a few questions, condensing anything down we can, making it as simple as we can for the questions. So these are just our notes, and then we're going to go back over here, and so that was Visa. Next one, let's do one more before we move on and go to and do the rest at a later time. So this is Sunlight Rentals. I think we've seen them before. So we're going to say that this happened on the 18th. So the 18th, and this was 10/20. So 10/20. And again, we could find them by selecting this or just start typing in Sunlight Rentals. And amount 1500, and that's rent expense. Now this one should give us some more surety. We thought last time there's a rental. We thought they're renting a place. It sounds like that's a rental agency, and last time we put it into rental. Now we see it again, the exact same dollar amount going into rental. So that should give us some more assurance that our assumption was right last time. I mean, if it's the same amount every month and it's going into rent, it's going to something that's called rental stuff, then we could probably be fairly certain that this is the rent payment. So we're going to say okay, and that makes us feel a bit more assured that we're going on the right path there. So we'll highlight that, and that's where we'll stop here, and we'll continue and with the rest next time. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.